Bleacher Report had a top 5 list, which is a little bit more positive, a little bit more favorable to the Pistons. And I'm going to put it on the screen and we can kind of react to it. So they had their top 5 players ready to explore into stardom, and you can kind of go over it. You got Cade Cunningham, Brandon Miller, Keegan Murray, Jalen Williams, and Chet Holmgren. I want to get your thoughts on this list. What do you think of it?
I'll start without addressing the elephant in the room first. I'll go from 5 to 2. Chet being 5 is generally pretty surprising to me. I feel like he would be a pretty easy 2 or 3 here, if not even 1. Just based on how people talk about him, like the whole comparison with a guy, like the fact that it was a debate between him and Victor Wembanyama really shows like how special of a prospect Chet Holmgren is. I mean, I'll be the first to admit I wasn't extremely high on Chet coming into the league. I thought he was too thin, and I didn't think his game would translate to the NBA, and I have been proven immensely wrong, right? Like I remember literally like the first, it wasn't even the first like Vegas Summer League game. I think it was like that Utah Summer League. I knew that like that moment he started looking like Kevin Durant out there. I was like, okay, I was wrong, right? So I think Chet I would honestly have higher on this list, especially over a guy like Keegan Murray, who I know I have a little bit of a history with Sacramento fans. Historically, I'm not seen as a big Keegan Murray supporter, but I actually am a pretty big fan of his. Yeah, I know. I am actually a pretty big fan of his game. I just don't necessarily believe in his ceiling being incredibly high. Like if you look at all the players on this list, I can see a Brandon Miller being a perennial all-star, 100%. Especially based on how he played last year, his size, his overall offensive feel for the game. He's a little more aggressive than a Keegan Murray is, although they have like similar builds. He plays a lot different than Keegan does. Keegan doesn't really demand the ball and doesn't have as much on the ball shot creation that Brandon Miller does. So him being 2 is justifiable to me. If it were me, I would have put Keegan Murray 5. And that's not a slight on Keegan Murray. I really do think he's going to be a player that lasts like 10, 15 years in the league and probably sustains a pretty decent level of production throughout his entire career. It's just the fact that I don't see his ceiling being like an all NBA guy. Like I think his ceiling is really similar to a guy like Chris Middleton. You know what I mean? Like where that's a really valuable player, even on a championship team, that's a really valuable player. But do I think he's ever going to be like a serious star in the NBA? No, not necessarily. And I think Jalen Williams, though, is a guy who does have that type of potential. He's someone who amongst like that draft crowd and amongst like the NBA nerds, he's a bit divisive because there's people who are extremely bullishly high on him. Like they believe he can be like one of the best young stars in the entire NBA, and they think his ceiling is immensely high. I remember people were saying his ceiling was higher than Cade Cunningham's. I would not go that far. But at the same time, like I can't deny the fact that he's a really special prospect. And I think if we're talking as far as like intangibles and everything, like his overall attitude towards the game is undeniable. Like his energy he has on the game. If you ever watch an OKC game, like the whole crowd's barking, he gets the team involved. Like those are things that go beyond just basketball. And it's almost like this intangible, innate thing that you either have or don't have. And Jalen Williams is one of those players that like, yes, he's a great bucket getter. Like he's a great bucket getter. I think he's a respectable two-way player, and I think his ceiling is pretty high. I would have him 3 here, or I would keep him 4. I would have Chet Holmgren 3, and I'd have Keegan Murray 5. And then as far as Cade, I don't know what more I could say than I haven't already said about Cade Cunningham. I am someone who I've been a fan of Cade's game since like 2020, and I've never been someone who's like watched high school sports, you know what I mean, like on like a level where I'm like, oh, this guy's coming out of high school, he's gonna be really special, unless it's like a Zion Williamson or like Chet Holmgren. Actually, I did watch in high school, Imani Bates, like those types of guys. Cade Cunningham was one of those guys for me where I was like, I was aware of him before he even got into college, and just knowing how well he feels like the game out and how his pace is unshakable is such a rare quality to me. I think his overall feel for the game is on the level of like the very best in the league. Like I remember year 1, he was going bucket for bucket with KD. Like most rookies can't do that. And I think the only reason he's not talked about as the generational prospect I really do believe he is because of the team. If I'm going to be completely honest, he hasn't been put in a position. And I think anybody watching this either knows this or has an opinion on this, that he hasn't really been put in the right position to like explode into stardom. Like he hasn't been put in the position to maximize his potential because there's been so much put on his plate from literally day one. Like day one, he was seen as the savior of this franchise. And unless you're LeBron James, that's not going to happen. And like Cade Cunningham, I believe is an incredibly special prospect. I don't even know if like LeBron could have survived like in the modern NBA with the teams that Cade had been given. And it's not even to say the talent necessarily has always been bad on these teams. It's just that when I'm on the podcast with Ku, this phrase is brought up a lot, is like basketball sense. The teams in the past have not made any basketball sense. Like it could be good talent, but it doesn't fit together well. And I think when you're putting a team around Cade, because that's what they have been doing the last few years, is putting a team around Cade, you have to think about what maximizes his skill set. And when you put him out there as one of 1.5 shooters or 2 shooters at most, you're not putting anyone in the position to win. Like that's just, unless you even have Curry out there. And even then, that's still like a struggle. You know what I mean? I really just, I feel like he hasn't been put in the right positions to fully display how special of a prospect he is. And even then, he's still listed at number 1 here because he has been able to show flashes of how great he can be. Like he had honestly a great season this past year while being on historically one of the worst teams in NBA history. So I think Cade is just a guy that a lot of people, I say this with like some of my friends, I feel like Cade is a perfect barometer of where I view your basketball intelligence. Like if you're incredibly low on Cade and you think like, oh, his team hasn't won any games, so clearly he's not good, I kind of know where you are. And then if you're like, I think he hasn't really been put in the position to win and he hasn't been put in the position to succeed, I think we, you know, like it's a general gauge of like where you are. So I 100% agree with Cade being number 1 here.
Yeah, I was kind of surprised that, you know, we were getting any kind of love from Bleacher Report and that Cade was one. It kind of shocked me. I think the list, you could probably, you know, have them in any which order. I would actually take Keegan Murray out of this list completely because I don't think he has the tools to become a star. I think, to your point, he's a good B player, like a Chris Middleton type, I think you said. I don't think he'll flourish in Sacramento. Like if he went to another team, maybe he could put up 20 points a game, but I don't think he's a star. I personally, if I had to take him out and replace him with somebody, you could talk me into Victor Wembanyama. You could talk me into Shaedon Sharpe, who I'm really high on. I think Shaedon Sharpe has a gear that we haven't even seen yet, personally. And
Yeah.
he's kind of like Cade. He's kind of in that same kind of situation where, you know, there's talented guys around him, but like basketball wise and basketball sense, it just doesn't fit, and the cohesion just doesn't make any type of sense. Like I had Sean Murphy on, I believe 2 weeks ago, and he read a stat to me that blew my mind. You know how many teammates Cade Cunningham has had in his 3 years in Detroit?
It's got to be. I know the Pistons had over 30 people on their roster this year, and that's not to count. I would probably say like close to 60.
70.
Damn.
More wins than he's had in Detroit. Cade's had 32 wins since he's been in Detroit, or something like that. I think that's what the stat in his record was like 32 and something, but he's had 70 plus teammates. I was just like, man, that's all kind of sideways. And then you look at how many games Troy Weaver won. He won 72. So 70 players that Cade's had, 72 wins. This is like, wow, holy crap. Like, just malpractice on Troy Weaver's part. I get what Troy was trying to do. He was trying to get talent around Cade, but the talent just never fit with him. Like, you need spacing around him. Like, he still averaged 22, 7.5 assists and 4 rebounds on historically bad spacing and shooters around him. Like, you give him actual spacing, who's to say he can't get up to 26 points a game?
I think that's extremely tangible for Cade. Like I really feel like he's a guy who can be like a 26, 27, 5-6 rebounds, 8-9 assists. I could even go as far as double-digit assists and I really do believe, and I'm sure we'll get into this, but I think this year he has the best opportunity to explode into stardom because the team around him, whatever you want to put their win total at is whatever you want to put their win total at, makes more basketball sense than it has in any year before.
Yeah, I mean, I'm really high on Cade. Some people call me a Cade Cunningham glazer at times, which I will take that. He's probably the best draft prospect we've had since Grant Hill. That's just how I think of him. I'm not comparing him to Grant Hill. I'm not comparing.
Yeah.
I'm just saying the best draft prospect we've had since Grant Hill, because I think he's that special. And I think me and you were kind of like on the same wavelength. The Pistons just have not put a good roster around him. I mean, like I think I did like a top 5 list of his best veteran teammates, and it was like Jeremy Grant, Bojan, like Alec Burks. Like, dude, that's awful.
I mean, even a guy like Boyan, like I will say, like the first year, I mean, really him and Cade played like what 10 games together that first year, but that first stretch, like his efficiency was great. He was a great fit on the team. However, availability is really what caused that to diminish, is because like that year Cade got injured, and then the year after, this past year, Boyan was hurt for like 50% of the time he was here up until the trade deadline. So I like, if you're looking like at even just the names alone, I feel like it doesn't tell the full story. Like even like a guy like Alec Burks not really available during his time with Cade, you know, like he hasn't really had, and it's crazy to say this, but like he really hasn't had true veteran presence that like he can learn from as far as like on the court. Like there's always guys I'm sure he can learn from off the court and who can tell him, you know, oh, this and that, or like give him advice, but it always hits different when you can actually see someone who is actively at better or on your level as a veteran. And I don't think he's really had that outside of like Jeremy.
Yeah, and like even then, I mean, even the fan base was just like Jeremy's, taking his shots away, and Jeremy was kind of looking for his. But towards the end of the season, Jeremy was kind of deferring to Cade, saying, "Okay, this is your team. I'll kind of defer to you." But I mean, to your point, yeah, he hasn't had the best teammates around him. He hasn't had a veteran that he can lean on. Try to get wisdom from inside the locker room. But doesn't surprise me that like he's in a top 5 list to blossom as a star. I think Trajan did a really good job of finding vets that can shoot, space the floor, and not make his life a living hell.
Yeah, which is the bare minimum, but it was accomplished.